Hey, I'm Joel Wanasek. I'm a pro mixer and the co-founder of NailTheMix.com, the coolest place on the internet to learn how to mix music. And today I'm going to do a breakdown of the mix of the song Monsters by All Time Low. This is a collaboration with Black Bear and Demi Lovato. This is a really cool track. It's got a lot of very complicated things that are in the mix here. I think Alex Ghenea, who mixed this, did a fantastic job. So let's break it down here part by part and talk about this mix because it's fire.
Why do all the monsters come out at night? Why do we sleep when we want to hide?
Okay, so what do we hear when we listen to this right away? We've got a guitar and we've got some vocals. So listen to the balances between the two of those elements and let's analyze that.
Monsters come out at night. Why do we sleep when we want to hide?
Okay, so one thing you'll notice right away is that the guitars are actually a little bit louder than the vocals, which in a song that's kind of poppy, normally you wouldn't expect to hear. So that's a cool balancing decision. I think it's super bold. The guitars are bright and kind of chimey, kind of scooped in the mid-range. They're very tight and, you know, there's not a ton of low end in them. The vocal has a really cool effect on it. So listen to the guitars.
Monsters come out at night. Why do we sleep
Hear how clean that EQ is.
when we want to hide? Why do I run back to you?
Got a nice little bit of compression. Now let's take a look at the vocals here.
Why do all the monsters come out at night?
The vocals are nice and bright and mid-forward. There's not a ton of sibilance on them. There's very good amount of de-essing. You know what I mean? The S's are very controlled. What really stands out to me is the cool effect space on the voice. I just love, there's a very subtle delay in there and the type of reverb effect that's on it. Listen to the ambience that creates because Alex is going to use this ambience across his entire mix and this type of ambient tone for all the vocals. And it's a really cool because it kind of gives it a unique sound and sets a really cool sound stage. So let's have a listen to that.
Why do we sleep when we want to hide? Why do I run back to
Hear the ambience and the tails and the reverbs and this tight delay.
you like I don't mind?
Let's listen very carefully to the kick and snare drum and the type of tonal decisions that they made to lay the foundation, and then we'll move up to the vocals. Pay attention to the attack of the kick, the bottom of the kick, the type of snare, the type of ambience on it.
Another day, another headache in this hangover hotel.
These drums are mixed very pop. I can tell that this is mixed by a pop mixer. When I say the comment about the pop mixer, what do I hear right away? So when I listen to this kick, what stands out to me is like the hip hop pop technique of taking a kick drum and saturating the top end attack of it digitally, right? With some kind of like saturation plugin. It's got a very telltale type of characteristic. So when I hear this kick drum, the top end of it, the attack, it doesn't sound like it's generated through compression or EQ, but through saturation. You know, for example, like hip hop mixers will take sometimes like a 808 or something like that, and they will use filtering to filter the low and then filter the top end to get a different type of attack and saturate it and stuff depending on the type of attack they want. Same thing with the kick drums. Or, you know, for example, in metal, we might take like the top of a kick and the bottom of a kick and, you know, change the different type of attack. So a very similar technique here in this mix is used because you could hear by the type of attack on the drum how saturated it is, but the bottom doesn't sound super saturated, that a technique like this was most likely used. So pay attention to that.
Another day, another headache in this hangover hotel.
Normally a rock mixer would generate that kind of kick drum, you know, like with compression. You know, it's just a very standard tech like CLA or Randy Starr or one of these guys, you know, they would definitely approach it like that. So this is definitely a pop technique applied to a rock kind of kick drum, which is cool. It sounds unique. I like it.
Used to the rhythm.
Okay, so that's snare. Let's talk about that snare.
Another day, another headache in this hangover.
The snare is mixed rocky. It's kind of got a cool reverb on it. And what I like about the reverb is the reverb tail kind of ends right as the next kick comes in. You know, it's like you could take the kick drum, you know, and have it affect and gate off the ambience on the snare where it kind of runs and cuts. So it sounds like there's something like that going on.
Hotel. Getting used to the rhythm. Yeah.
Which is cool because it gives the snare this nice long ambience that just disappears on the downbeat of the kick. So I love that. I think that's really cool and that's awesome. Again, something I would expect to see more in pop than, for example, rock mixing. So I love that. I think that's super awesome. Okay, so let's talk about the bottom end now. Okay, the kick drum, the bottom end of the kick, and the bass guitar. Let's identify that relationship.
Another day, another headache.
So which one is below which? Listen carefully to the bottom.
Hotel. Getting used to the rhythm.
So the bass is really tight and kind of filtered high. The kick is under the bass and adding that extension, the low end extension here to the bass, and it makes it punch really tight.
Yeah, I know this beat too well. Tunnel vision.
So the bass is, it's got a lot of like 80 to 200 hertz in it. You know what I mean? It's very round. It's very smooth. It's very warm. It doesn't have a ton of like sub lows. Like there's nothing pushing 30 hertz in this mix or anything like that. So it's mixed again, very pop, very tight. Whereas, if we were doing like a rock mix or something like new metal, we'd be flapping down at like 30 hertz and doing all this extended low. And not here. It's very tight, very pristine, very clean. I love it. It sounds great. Okay, now we got some guitars that come in. So let's analyze those real quick in terms of the balances. These guitars actually have a lot of like 800 to 1K honk in them, which is kind of cool because everything else is so scooped and carved out. This fills in the mid-range, it gets your attention, and it kind of gives it a place to live. If the guitars were like 2 to 3K, pokey, 5K, it would start conflicting with the way the vocals are made. Balance-wise, the guitars are pretty loud. Notice how they gain attention. This is mixed drum forward, guitar forward, bass kind of down, and vocals are kind of tucked. Okay, let's analyze these vocals. And there's a lot of cool vocal stuff that's going to come in later in this song. I was jamming this in the car this morning before I did this breakdown, and there's a lot of layers, because we have Black Bear and Demi that come in and like, really cool. We've got like a lo-fi saturated kind of voice here, that's filtered, that's got a little bit of subtle saturation. Same kind of ambient space we had earlier. It's a really cool sound. And it also fits the snare ambience. Vocals get hi-fi here, right? They go full spectrum. They don't have a ton of bottom end in them, very mid-forward. Still a little saturated. He's got the vocals pretty saturated here. Listen to how gritty those are. There's a lot of layers, but they're kind of filtered. They're almost, I don't want to say lo-fi, but, because they're bright on top, but they're definitely crunchy in the mid-range, which is kind of cool because, again, it takes the crunch out of that guitar earlier and it kind of adds that kind of crunchy sound to the vocal. Another thing I noticed here, pay attention to what just happened to the bass versus the verses. So if we listen to the bass in the verse, what do you notice in the chorus? The bass just got a lot louder. So there's a nice bass automation there where he turns up the bottom end to really make the bass fat because it's the chorus. Guitars are really rich and mid-rangey here. They're still loud, same kind of balance, except like I said, the bass guitar came over. Cymbals are kind of secondary. Pay attention to the overhead snare relationship. So we got the same kind of reverb, but again, listen to the amount of saturation on the vocals here. And again, the vocals aren't super loud, which is kind of interesting, but I like it. It works. It's cool. Another thing that's kind of telltale of like pop and hip hop mixing, pay attention to the top end of the hi-hat and the snare, okay? Normally in rock, we would mix a snare bright, but in hip hop and pop, you see people prioritize like what's catching the ear in the top end. For example, the top end of the hi-hat versus the snare. So there's a little bit of a darker snare top here, and what that does is it draws the top end transient energy to the hi-hat. The snare is kind of dull. It's different than, again, how a rock mixer would approach something like that. New vocal here. Let's see what Black Bear's got. Let's pay attention solely to the vocals.
Heard the way you contradict me. I swear everything look worse at night. I think I'm overthinking. I don't care who I might hurt along the way.
That flow is sick. Mix-wise, it's still kind of in the same ambient space. Obviously, a slightly different balance between the things. It's hard to identify what exact effects balance, but the effects balance is different. It sits in the same kind of space, but it sounds a little bit different because obviously it's a different vocalist.
I'm addicted to the way you hurt, the way you contradict me. I swear.
The vocals are compressed pretty heavily, but it's a very smooth compression sound, which is cool. Like it's not very spatty or spitty. You don't hear a lot of like, the plosives and S's and things like that coming out of the voice. They don't sound so saturated to me compared to the earlier vocals. I love the low octave in there. It's really loud. Plus you got the female vocal on top. And the only thing instrumentally too here.
To the way you hurt, the way you contradict me. I swear everything looks.
So we added a trap hat here, which is pretty cool.
And I don't care who I might hurt along the way.
And again, listen to the top end of the snare versus the trap hat, right? The snare is out of the way of the hat.
And when I'm drinking, so tell me pretty lies. Look me in my face.
We just got a little bit more guitar going on. That's kind of tucked. It's not as loud as earlier.
Even if it's fake, you can leave me on
When I say not as loud, I should clarify, I mean this guitar.
where you contradict me. I swear everything look worse than
Because it gets louder in the second half of the verse, just like it did in the first verse. Then it comes up, right? Builds some intensity. You got more vocal layers that come up. Okay, let's take a look at the next chorus. All right, so we got Demi Lovato. Now, the vocals sound really saturated here, and I'm not sure if it's the original vocalist's tone that's saturated or if there's some on Demi's, because the way it's mixed, it sounds saturated, but it's hard to hear which vocal is more saturated than the other. Which I like here because you have a duet, which is really hard to mix. You can hear both voices, but the vocals are actually a little bit louder than the last chorus. Listen to how crunchy that is with the saturation. It's super saturated. All right, no more saturated vocals. Now we're going to full bandwidth. Okay, so let's break this down. What do you hear on the voice? There's a lot of layers going on. There's high, airy kind of vocals. You know, there's the main vocal. Really loud harmony. And I just love that very high frequency air to the voice that just accumulates across all the vocal layers, and it just sounds like big, big, big money production. Listen to the ultra top end of this. It's so sick. It's like taking a Maggie cue and just cranking like 40,000 cycles and just demolishing it. Sounds really, really good. This section is actually really challenging to mix because there's so many vocal layers. Listen to how many vocals are going on and things that are balanced to kind of make it. And again, when you listen to it, you don't really notice all these things. You just kind of listen to it and you're engrossed in the song. But like when you break it down and you see how many layers, I mean, there's probably like 20 to 30 tracks of vocals going on here across this bridge. It's crazy. You got ad libs baked in there. You know, it's really, really hard to mix something like this vocally. And I think he's just absolutely did a phenomenal job with it. It sounds amazing. Just really pay attention to all those subtle vocals and how they're balanced and layered and EQ'd and how mathematically like locked those things are in terms of like the frequency separation. It's amazing. Such good mixing. It's phenomenal. I guess we would expect nothing less from Serban's son, right? I mean, Serban, one of the greatest mixers ever. You know, I mean, it probably runs in the veins. Okay, that was cool. Listen to the ad libs here, how they go from center to, we're starting to use panning here on the left. There's just so many layers of vocals going on. I mean, this song has got to be insanely done. So I'm going to leave it right there. I mean, just bravo. This mix is fantastic. I love the song. I think the hook is one of the best ones I've heard in years. Really, really, really great job all the way around. The production team and the mixing is just fantastic. So let me know what you think of this mix in the comments below. And of course, if you got anything you want me to break down, I got a long list of great mixes to go through to talk about here. So if you like this type of content, please click like, subscribe, and the notification bell because I'm doing these about 2 to 3 times a week, depending on the week. So thank you so much for watching, and please check out nailthemix.com. And of course, if you want more mixing tips and things like that, you can check out my TikTok and my Instagram. That's at Joel Wanasek. Have a great day.